Hello and welcome to another episode of Shootin' the Shift. I'm Nicole Magic.
Kristin Johnston.
Yeah, and we're bringing you whatever comes to our minds, our hearts. And one of the things that we had was we were just talking a little bit about consciousness and being in that flow, being in that creative state, and then feeling like you just fell right out of it. And everything seems or feels like it's shut down and you're in this desolate place.
It's not, I wouldn't say it's super common, especially if you live your life in a way that's, tapped in or, expanded in your awareness. But it does happen where I consider it's like the seventh chakra, the connection to the divine or the quantum field. It almost feels like someone puts a cap on it. And it can happen. And when it happens, for me, it's incredibly painful. There's this, I actually like to reference, it's a Trevor Hall song, and he says, we forget and remember, and we forget again. And it's like part of being human or being a shifting being, shifting into higher consciousness is that oscillation between remembering, yes, which feels like connection and flow and miracles and magic, and you feel, it's a feeling.
It's kind of like a dream too, because when you dream and then you wake up and you're trying to remember and you remember portions of things, or everything is very etheric, or even accessing a higher level of consciousness, all of a sudden everything comes in, and it's this awakening that happens within your energy system. But your mind just can't capture all of it, so you're awakened and then you forget in a certain way, but your energy remembers.
Yes, so it's like you expand, and then there's that expansion and that contraction, and you're right, it's like your field of information, the field of energy that exists within and all around us, never really forgets. The field remembers, but the human part of us, which is, I think, the part that is subject to suffering, or it's the human part of us, the part of us that really experiences ourselves as separate. I'm in this body and you're in that body, and I've got to survive in this harsh world, and those beliefs that really are intimate to us as individuals can feel, they can make your energy feel really dense sometimes. And so that the contrast of that is when you feel like you're more energy than matter, and you feel like you are this infinite creative being, which is, I believe, the eternal truth. But so how do you navigate? That's kind of what we were talking about before we started filming, was how do you, as a human and a spirit, navigate through the terrain that is life on planet Earth, with its ups and downs and its peaks and its valleys and its challenges and its triumphs? And what are some of the ways that you can skillfully maneuver through life? Because I think consciousness is a skill set that it doesn't make the human experience, it does make it magical, but it's magical even perhaps without expanding your consciousness with intention. But how do you develop the skill set? What were some of the challenges that you experienced, and then some of the strategies that you developed for kind of staying tapped in or staying connected and expanded?
Oh geez, that's a really good question, because there were so many different iterations of things and stepping up through those conscious levels, right? So I think that when we first start off, we don't know who we are. We are this culmination of what everybody expects us to be. As we're growing up, we have to obey the rules of the house, and we're absorbing all of the programs from our parents and their parents and all the epigenetics up the lineage. And at some point you get to this phase of, okay, who am I? And when you start tapping into that, that's when magic starts happening, I think, is when you're questioning, who am I? Why am I here? And asking those questions and figuring it out, and really tapping in real, raw, getting into how do I feel about this, no matter what it is? And really feeling into everything and owning those feelings and realizing what it is that you do want, because everybody knows what they don't want and very few people know what they do want. And when you think you know what you want and you start going towards it, that's when the trial and error comes in. No, I don't really want that.
So the contrast, it's like
contrast.
the contrast is the teacher. And it's like emotions are the navigator. They're part of the blueprint. Like, oh, this feels good. But do you like that question? I'm like, who am I? What's the meaning and purpose of my life? It's an inner experience of you can use your emotions to navigate. Of like, oh, that naturally feels good. So the journey from the head into the heart, the head is sort of the program, like you said, like what you get downloaded with, the thoughts about who I'm supposed to be, how I'm supposed to live, what my life is supposed to look like, as opposed to following, like, this feels good to me. This is something that...
Calling.
Yeah.
The heart is like the calling, and your gut is this actually in alignment? So it's that grounding.
Yes, I love that. And so a lot of people, I think, the suffering and the struggling, it really comes from that forgetfulness of who we are as a soul, and living in that belief that we have to be something or do something, and so we're projecting all of our energy into an image as opposed to being in alignment with the soul self, which has wisdom beyond what the mind or the intellect could really develop. So I think that's probably, that's actually part of the strategy. So whenever I feel, if I have those moments where I feel like the crown chakra has closed and I'm believing that I'm this separate entity in a harsh world and I've got to somehow defend myself from the inevitable pains and suffering of being human, part of my strategies for reconnecting and like reawakening to that feeling of connection is to whatever I can do to get into that flow state of consciousness. For me, it's always been art and creativity and conversations like this, connecting with like minds. That I would actually say is probably the single most important thing, is to have people of like mind who can reverberate those desires and those intentions, and that feeling of connection can happen, right? It's like with people, with other people.
When you have the support of somebody, even, I say a lot, I'll hold space for you. Because it's not necessarily about, Kristin, I have this problem, like, help me solve this problem. It's not about that. It's about being able to verbalize what's happening within you and get it out so that it can be out, real, and then analyzed by yourself, not by somebody else. It's kind of like, you can't analyze my dream for me. You can say what you would think if it was your dream, but you don't know what it means for me. It's the same thing with your life, is that you want to bring something to the attention of somebody so that you have somebody to connect with over it and can work it out, and maybe they can ask you some questions to guide and support you, and they're just there to hold that space so that you can figure it out, so that you can work through it. And sometimes it is just a prompt of, well, what do you need to do next? And it's not them telling you, it's not advice, no unsolicited advice, right? And when you have somebody, whether it's a best friend, a family member, a significant other, you can just bring those things up that, my mind is telling me this story, right? Using those kinds of languages instead of, you made me feel like this, or I feel this, or this is how I'm perceiving this situation. Because it's, you know, I know we keep going back to some of the Hermetic principles, but like, all truths are half-truths. So it's whatever your perspective is, what is your perception, and checking that. Is it real?
Perception is so huge, based off, really, it's our experience of reality is is our perception of the experience. And do you think that emotions, this is a question I've been asking myself a lot recently,
Okay.
do you think emotions skew our perceptions of reality? Like, sometimes how we perceive reality through the lens of the emotions is not really the reality of a situation. And so there's that imperative balance or harmony between logical thinking and emotional thinking. And so we have both of those, both sides of the brain for a reason. And how do we find, for me, part of this shift into higher consciousness is coming into harmony between those states. Because I've realized if I live solely by the navigation of my emotions,
Forget it.
yeah,
Forget it.
yeah.
You're doomed. You'll never make it, like Glum from Lilliput. I like that. My short answer on your question is yes and no, because it depends on what level of consciousness you're at and how you navigate your emotions. So there's a few points that I'd love to make on that. Is when we are operating from an emotionally riled state, we are not thinking rationally. And you want that harmony between the two to understand and be able to articulate how you feel about something and logically think through it. So also the other piece is our emotions are not meant to be felt for more than 90 seconds. We're supposed to be able to process them within a 90-second period. Anything beyond that is ruminating and then turning into the moods and the attitudes and the reality. So if you're not processing through your emotions in 90 seconds, and time yourself, because I've done this, and I can process through emotions so quickly that people don't even know that I even felt an emotion sometimes. And it allows me to not be stoic, but to be able to speak about what I felt outside of being in the emotion. So you're not being triggered, and then behaviors aren't being elicited because of an emotional trigger. And that's what it's about, is being able to think logically, feel through the emotion, and process through it fully in order to experience what that means for you, and then absorb the wisdom that brought.
Exactly. Yeah. So to be able to really feel what you're feeling, even if it's not rational.
Yeah.
Like, because sometimes our feelings are not, that's the point, is like sometimes feelings are not rational. And anyone who has children understands this, or you watch children have these emotional outbursts. But we can't deny the feelings that we have. We can create space, like you had said earlier, we can hold space for our emotions, but also have that logical mind that can, speak to us and allow those things to both exist. And it's like one of the ways that we skillfully navigate through.
Yeah. Your emotions are a trigger meter, really.
Yeah.
That's what it is. That's how I look at it anyway.
Yeah. All of these things are so important to the human experience. Like that's part of what I think this shift into higher consciousness is about too, is how do we human? How do we human effectively, and what does it mean to be in this human body and to have these experiences and to do them in a harmonious way?
What is an effective human?
Yeah. What is an effective human? That's a fantastic question, because that's the one thing that we all share. It's the one commonality that we all share, is that if you're in a body, you're having a human experience. So what is it? Maybe humaning with awareness is what it means to be an effective human, is to be aware that we are eternal beings having a temporary experience of humanity that comes with a certain level of feeling, a certain level of thinking, and a certain level of magic and mystery. And so to allow yourself to participate consciously within the epic mystery of life. And there are ways that make it flow better, because there's ways that also make it really, being human can be incredibly challenging.
I might just start laughing hysterically, because in my mind, as you're saying all these things, our minds go in all these like visual places, at least mine does. And I just imagined, all these humans being placed on the earth by, the supreme being, and just being like, okay, here's your team building island. Have at it, guys.
Yeah.
We're not team building very well.
So maybe effectively humaning is figuring out how do we
Come together.
Yeah, that's part of the evolution of human
In our
consciousness.
diversity,
Yeah.
right? So it's not about coming together and all thinking the same, being the same, and kumbayaing. It is about coming together and accepting and seeing and understanding, even though you might have a very different opinion than I do. Because guess what, guys? Opinions don't matter. My opinion doesn't matter. The only way that my opinion matters to somebody is somebody values me and looks at me and says, I value your opinion. Like, how does this look on me today? I could tell you it looks great. I could tell you it looks horrible. My opinion doesn't matter. How do you feel in that is more the question, right? How do you feel in that? So that's how I look at it.
It's what we value.
Crazy.
It's life is a trip, and I think part of the reason why we have conversations like this is how do we skillfully navigate through life. And team building is huge, and accepting other people's perspectives on life, but also being able to entertain multiple perspectives. And to be able to shift your own perspective when new information comes in that may actually expand and elevate you. It may also challenge you. All of that is part of the expansion of consciousness, right? Of being willing to learn and grow and really participate in the experience of life, and be willing.
Actually, have you seen the new Doctor Strange movie?
Yeah, we just went and watched that.
Oh, okay. So that has great examples all through it, right? So all these multiverses and like, do you remember the scene where they're going through dimension after dimension after dimension, like the paint dimension or whatever, and like all these places, and then they're coming through. It's like, whoa! It was very trippy and very like trying to absorb all of this information in a very short period of time as you're watching it, and then trying to put yourself in that position, right? So there's a lot of that happens in life when you're awakening. And then, not to like give everything away, I don't want to give everything away, but going through the entire movie with Wanda to the very end is like what you go through in your life when you're awakening, right?
All the different perspectives or different sort of like...
There's a selfish piece of like, here it is, here, the victim, everything's happening to me, right? The losses and being in that desperation and all of that, and then moving into, higher levels of consciousness and understanding.
So you think you move through, we move into higher and higher degrees and levels of love and connection and understanding and empathy and compassion, and these are, emotional states that we've seen, really, what was that, encouraged, like, the Buddhist philosophy is a lot about loving kindness and compassion, and so that's part of that journey in the shift, is starting from this belief in separation and this selfish, egocentric self, and then kind of purifying ourselves higher and higher. And so what I want to, I kind of want to wrap up, but I wanted to give, what are the takeaways? What are the takeaways? Is so human life is full of contrast. It's full of good and bad, euphoria and suffering.
Opposite poles.
Polarity, and you're going to get both sides of the coin. And so we were talking about this earlier, part of the shift, or what some people experience as the shift, is they make it a goal to attain or to achieve. Somehow we are going to reach salvation or the end of suffering, and that is a beautiful goal, but how do we not judge ourselves when we find ourselves caught in the veil of forgetfulness and we are suffering and we are hurting and we're wanting things to be different, because that's such a universal part of the human experience. And anyone who's paying attention just to social media, there's chaos in the world. There's division and pain and separation, and there's people fighting people. And so what are the takeaways? What are some of the things that we actually can do to shift ourselves from a darkened state of consciousness into a more expanded, compassionate, loving state of being? Because if we're living in that state, that's the state we're delivering into the world, and then that's the world that we're creating. So how do we create a more peaceful and loving world, and how do we shift? I know some of the ways that I can do it. I'd like to hear some of your ways. Like, what do you do?
Let's do a one for one.
Okay.
I'd say the first thing that comes to my mind is getting curious. So getting curious about, how you're feeling, what it means for you, and also getting curious to ask if there's somebody else involved, if there's, if you're not agreeing with somebody's opinion. It's really important to understand where they're coming from and why they think that way, because you think a certain way because of your own programs. They think a certain way because of their own programs. So if you actually look at it, you're just looking at it from different parts of the scale.
Absolutely. So the desire for connection, as opposed to staking your ground, this is why I believe what I believe. Rather, it's like actually being genuinely curious about, well, why do you believe? And not with the intent to change another person, but to really understand. If we sought to understand more than we did to
tell stories instead of, and this comes a lot, I guess, with like a lot of religious people that are maybe operating from a subconscious kind of space, even that I have to convert you in order to get where I need to go, right? Or where I believe I want to go. If I have to convert you, there's this drive to make you believe, and nobody needs to be convinced of anything. So if you just tell your stories, this is why I believe this, and this is what it's done for me. This is where I was, and then, whether you found God or you just attained some kind of awakening or had a near-death experience, share the experiences and understand. Put yourself in that person's shoes of what would you be thinking in your person if you were going through that.
It's almost like tuning forks. Like it's like
the entrainment.
Exactly. If we have an experience and we share it, it's almost like we strike a certain chord, and that chord, it almost invites that other person to come into resonance with us if we're willing, and that's part of that shift. So if we can tap into our own loving resonance, if I can strike the chord of love within myself, and I can just try my best to be that or hold that, then it invites other people into that vibration with me, as opposed to if I'm in my anger, if I'm in my suffering, we're going to end up calling that into vibrational alignment. And then what happens is we find ourselves in these big fields of energy of, emotional resonance, and they might not be emotions that we would desire. So having anchor points, that would be probably my suggestion, is having anchor points that make you feel a way that you would desire to feel. Like, I love to feel creative. So if I find myself in a space where I'm like feeling limited or feeling stuck, if I can get myself into a creative flow, whether, and I love to feel connected to family. I love to feel connected to spiritual people. So I have anchor points where if I get stuck in this veil of forgetfulness, I'll look at, okay, what are my anchor points? What are the things that I know are going to get me into that vibrational state where I'm feeling love, I'm feeling connected, because that's going to shift my perceptions of reality. If I'm in an emotional state where I'm feeling isolated, I'm feeling stuck, then that's going to be my perception of my life. So have some anchor points. And one thing that I've taken away from the recovery community is be of service to other people. A lot of times our suffering comes from self-absorption. we're so self-absorbed with our own story and our own journey, and everybody's focusing on themselves. One way to get out of your own suffering is to get out of yourself. Go and be of service to somebody else. Maybe there's someone who needs something that you have. Maybe a friend is suffering and you can just be there for them. It can take us out of our own stuff pretty effectively.
Going along with the anchor points too is if you get into that creative mode, it can shift. Sometimes for people that may not feel as creative, right? Even just going and doing something creative, even if you don't feel like you're good at it, is still a way to shift your state of mind. And like sometimes I'll set up paints in the other room. I'm not a painter, and not, like my stuff's not going anywhere. It's not going to be any galleries or anything like that. But when I'm working, I'll sometimes go and take 10 minutes and go mess around with stuff just to see how it comes out, and then go back because it shifts me out, and then I become more productive. Another thing that you can do instead of being that creative space is just when you're feeling in a less than negative, emotional state, shift into looking at, pull out a picture or memory, go back into a memory space where something is bringing back positive memories, positive feelings, and be fully present in that moment. It will shift your vibration way higher and get you right out of that, just like this. So creating that space is going to be way more effective in getting you into whatever it is that you want to be doing at the time, instead of ruminating and creating those moods.
Absolutely, that's a beautiful, perfect strategy. It's not about what you're doing. It's not about the act. It's about how you can feel within that.
Yes.
So even if you could create a scenario in your own mind that never even existed in your reality, but your body is going to respond as though that scenario taking place in your mind is happening now. And so that's a perfect way to wrap this up, is what's happening in your mind is happening in your emotions, is happening in your experience of reality. And shifting your consciousness is taking your power back to realize that you are a creator. You are creating your perceptions. So no matter what's happening around you, even if it is the most challenging thing you've ever been faced with, you have the power within you to control your thoughts, which will influence your feelings, which will influence your perception. So this is an invitation to take your power back, to not be emotionally hijacked by life.
Recognize it is for your own growth.
Yes, taking your power back is literally that is your personal growth. That is your declaration of saying, this life is, it's my only, this is my only thing. This is the only thing that I own, is my experience. This is the only thing I'm in control of, is my perception. And so I would love to hear some of you guys' strategies. You sort of know what we do to take our power back and to feel connected and feel expanded. But I'm curious what you guys do. So if you want to leave it in the comments or reach out to us, privately, I'm really genuinely curious about how other people experience reality and what they do to shift their reality when times are challenging. And we can all help each other make this shift.
If you've used any of the techniques that we've talked about here and it's made a difference for you, let us know, because we love doing that.
Yeah.
So hit the like button, subscribe, and we'll see you next time at Shooting the Shift. Bye, guys.